It was 3:15 in the morning when the piercing ring of the doorbell shattered the blissful nighttime silence. At that time, I was living alone in a 3-room apartment. Lifting my head from the pillow, I froze, trying to figure out whether I had dreamed that sound or whether someone had actually rung the bell. About 20 seconds later, the ringing came again. Cursing and muttering something under my breath, I got out of bed and headed toward the front door. In my sleepy state, on autopilot, I reached one hand for the handle and the other for the latch to slide it open. The fact that it was the dead of night outside and that someone was repeatedly ringing my doorbell was already suspicious in itself. But for some reason, that didn't alarm me. I was just desperate to get back to my interrupted sleep. I would have opened the door for the nighttime visitor if not for what happened next. Suddenly, from the stairwell came the familiar sound of my neighbor's door opening. Well, finally made it home, I thought, and turned around to shuffle back to bed, when suddenly, from behind the door, a wild howl erupted. It was that very same neighbor screaming. His blood-curdling cry made my blood run cold. My soul instantly sank into my heels, and I was finally wide awake. Just as suddenly as it had started, the scream stopped. Fear and curiosity, that's what possessed me in those seconds. On tiptoe, like a spy, I crept up to my door and pressed my eye against the peephole. What I saw at first. Having heard the scream, I still felt curious. But, my home is my castle. There's nothing to be afraid of. However, pulling away from the peephole, I began to hear my own heartbeat. On the landing, 3 meters away from me, lay my goddamn neighbor, his limbs convulsing, and on him, or rather, on his body, sat that creature. A creature, because there's no other word for it. It was something that resembled a human in appearance, or more precisely, a woman. She wore a white dress stained with bloody spots, with disheveled red hair that shook along with her head as she, quite literally, quickly gnawed at the poor man's face. She just sat there and, like a hungry dog, devoured him. I had never experienced such horror in my entire life. Thank God the hallway light was on. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to see what was happening and would surely have gone out to check. And so I continued to stand and watch. Fear paralyzed both my body and my thoughts. It didn't even occur to me to call the police. I just stood and watched until the creature moved on to gouging out and devouring the eyeballs. Can you imagine that sight? No, you can't. Seeing and understanding what it was doing, my brain quickly reacted. And I gagged. No, I didn't vomit. I just made a characteristic sound, quietly, even raising my hand to my mouth. But apparently I shouldn't have done that. The creature suddenly froze. You know how a dog freezes in a snarl when someone tries to take its food during a meal. Slowly, it turned its head toward my door. That's when I felt truly sick, and I realized I had given away my presence. As it turned, its face came into the light of the hallway lamp. And I could see everything. Matted hair, pale skin, black bottomless eyes without iris or pupil, and teeth resembling those of a shark. Long, covered in blood, growing in several rows. Turning its head, its mouth twisted into an incomprehensible smile, and it made a sound like a child makes when eating delicious chocolate, and is offered another, even more delicious one. A genuine, joyful groan. My legs gave way, and I fell. I fell and, without taking my eyes off the door, began to crawl backward, hit the wall, and kept staring at my goddamn door. Suddenly there was a knock and the doorknob began to shake. Then the whole door began to shake. I couldn't force myself to do anything. I just sat and watched. Then the door began to shake with such violent blows that it seemed like it was about to fly right off, unable to contain itself. I, as cliché as it sounds, lost consciousness. I came to when it was already light outside. Someone was persistently ringing my doorbell. As soon as I woke up and heard the ringing, I immediately felt just as terrified as I had during the night. But the voices saying, "Open up, it's the police," sounded like a saving hymn. Looking through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers, and behind their backs lay a body covered with a yellow cloth. Of course, it was my neighbor's body. Before opening the door, I spent 5 minutes asking them probing questions to make sure they were really human. I told them everything as it happened. I told the press everything as it happened, and I told the police station everything. They took me for a psycho, dragged me through psychiatric hospitals, and much more. But I know what I saw. Everyone decided that some psychopath had just brutally killed the poor guy. That's all. But I saw, and I know. It wasn't a human. It was something horrible and intelligent. And my door was all scratched up and dented. What kind of person could do that? A couple of weeks later, having calmed down a bit, I was returning home in the evening. It was the first time since that incident that I wasn't afraid to be outside after dark. Approaching my replaced door, I was stunned. Right on it, a word was scratched. Wait! I locked myself in the apartment. Or rather, climbed onto the closet and didn't close my eyes until morning. I kept waiting for it to start breaking in again. But nothing ever happened. In the morning, I packed my things and left for another city to stay with my sister. I sold that apartment, never setting foot there again, along with all the furniture and all the belongings I left behind. If one night you wake up to someone ringing your doorbell or knocking on your door but you weren't expecting anyone, be careful.